I learned the hard way that telling the truth doesn't set you free, it costs you everything. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap perfume, the kind that clings to bad decisions. My hands were steady on the table, but my heartbeat wasn't. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. No one looked at me. Not my manager. Not HR. Not the people who had smiled at me yesterday like I mattered. The folder in front of them held the numbers, the proof, the truth they didn't want on record. "We're letting you go, Emily," HR said, like it was already decided before I walked in. Just like that. 10 years of work erased in under 10 minutes. My phone buzzed against the table, and for a second, I thought about ignoring it. I didn't. Daycare. Balance overdue. Pick up your son within 30 minutes or additional charges apply. My throat tightened. I nodded like I understood, like I accepted it, like I wasn't falling apart in inches. "Security will escort you out." That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet enough that no one noticed. I stood up, gathering my things, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But my fingers slipped. Papers scattered across the polished floor, white against black marble, the truth laid out for anyone who cared to look. No one did. Except him. I didn't notice him at first. He was standing near the glass wall, away from the table, dressed in a dark suit that fit too well to be accidental. Still. Watching. Not like the others. Not dismissive. Not bored. Focused. Like I was the only thing in the room that made sense. One of the guards reached for my arm, guiding me toward the door. I didn't fight. I didn't have the energy left to fight anything. But as I passed him, I felt it, that shift in the air, like a storm about to break without a sound. My papers were still on the floor. He stepped forward, bending just enough to pick one up. His fingers didn't rush. His movements didn't ask permission. He read it. Really read it. Then his eyes lifted to mine. Dark. Steady. Uncomfortably calm. "You chose truth," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I swallowed. Didn't answer. Couldn't. He tilted his head slightly, like he already knew. Knowing it would cost everything. The guard pulled me forward again, and this time I went. Because I had no choice. Because everything he said was true. And because something in the way he looked at me made my chest tighten for a completely different reason. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why he cared. I only knew one thing as the elevator doors closed behind me. I had just lost everything. And somehow, it didn't feel like the end. I did not cry until I got to the parking lot. Even then, it was not loud. Just a sharp inhale that never quite turned into a sob. The late afternoon sun hit too bright, reflecting off windshields like nothing in the world had changed, like I had not just lost the only stable thing in my life. My car sat at the far end, the same spot I parked every day because it was cheaper by a few dollars a month. I walked toward it on autopilot, keys tight in my hand, phone buzzing again. Daycare. Final notice. I pressed call before I could think myself out of it. "I am on my way," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Please, just give me a little more time." The woman on the other end sighed, not unkind, just tired. "Miss Carter, we have policies." I knew. I always knew. Everything in my life came with rules I could barely afford to follow. 30 minutes, she added finally. That is all I can do. 30 minutes. Across town. In rush hour. I nodded even though she could not see me and hung up. My hands shook as I unlocked the car. For a second, I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe normally. I should have stayed quiet. That thought came fast. Sharp. Easy. If I had just signed the report like they wanted. If I had just looked away. I would still have a job. My son would still have his routine. My life would still make sense. But then I saw the numbers again in my head. The lies. The way they expected me to pretend it was nothing. I tightened my grip on the wheel. No. I would not trade my son's future for a lie. The engine started on the second try, the familiar rattle grounding me just enough to move. Traffic crawled. Every red light felt personal. Every second ticking louder than the last. I checked the time. 22 minutes left. My phone buzzed again, but this time I did not answer. I could not afford another delay. By the time I pulled into the daycare lot, the sky had shifted into that soft gold that always made everything look calmer than it was. I ran inside, breath uneven, heart pounding. He was sitting by the window, small hands pressed against the glass, watching the door like he always did when I was late. My chest tightened in a way nothing else could touch. "Mommy," he said the second he saw me, and just like that, the entire world narrowed to that one word. I dropped to my knees, pulling him into my arms, breathing him in like oxygen. "I am here," I whispered. "I am so sorry." He did not ask questions. He never did. At 5 years old, he had already learned that sometimes adults said sorry for things they could not fix. On the drive home, he talked about his day. About a drawing he made. About how he got a gold star. I listened. I smiled. I nodded. I did everything I was supposed to do. But my mind kept drifting back to the conference room. To the papers on the floor. To him. The way he had looked at me. Not with pity. Not with curiosity. Something else. Something that felt deliberate. I pulled into our apartment complex just as the streetlights flickered on. Everything looked the same. The cracked pavement. The flickering hallway light. The sound of a television through thin walls. Normal. Ordinary. Safe. I told myself that was enough. It had to be. But as I reached for the door, something in my chest shifted again. That quiet instinct that had been right more times than I could count. I was not alone anymore. Not in the way I had been before. And I had a feeling, whatever came next had already been decided. I noticed the car before I noticed the silence. It was parked across the street, engine running, headlights off, like it had been there longer than it should have. I told myself it was nothing. Just another neighbor. Just another night. But my hand paused on the door handle anyway. My son tugged at my sleeve, impatient, asking about dinner, about cartoons, about everything that still made sense in his world. I smiled down at him and unlocked the door. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The small kitchen. The worn couch. The faint hum of the refrigerator that never quite stopped. Normal. Safe. I moved through the motions automatically, setting his backpack down, washing my hands, pulling out the last of the groceries I had been stretching all week. Pasta again. Cheap. Reliable. Enough. He sat at the table, swinging his legs, talking about a boy in his class who could run faster than everyone else. I listened. I nodded. I stirred the pot. But my mind kept drifting back outside. To the car. To the man in the conference room. To the way he had looked at me like I was something worth noticing. I shook the thought away. People like him did not follow people like me home. That was not how the world worked. After dinner, I tucked my son into bed, smoothing his hair back the way my mother used to do for me. He smiled, already half asleep, trusting that I would still be here in the morning. I stayed a second longer than usual, just watching him breathe. Then I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway. That was when I heard it. A soft knock. Not loud. Not urgent. Just deliberate. My heart skipped once. Then twice. No one knocked on my door at this hour. No one I knew. I moved slowly, every step measured, every instinct telling me to be careful. The hallway light flickered as I passed, casting shadows that felt longer than they should have. Another knock. Same rhythm. Calm. Certain. I reached the door and hesitated, my hand hovering just above the handle. "Who is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. There was a pause. Just long enough to make my pulse climb. Then his voice came through. "You already know." My breath caught before I could stop it. Of course I knew. I had known the moment I saw that car. I unlocked the door anyway. Slowly. Carefully. And when I opened it, he was there. Same suit. Same stillness. Same eyes that did not miss anything. Up close, he felt different. Not louder. Not more threatening. Just heavier. Like the air shifted around him. "You should not be here," I said, even though it came out quieter than I intended. He did not move. Did not step forward. Just looked at me like he was confirming something. "And yet," he replied, "this is exactly where I needed to be." I swallowed, trying to steady myself. "Why?" The question came out before I could stop it. He glanced past me for a fraction of a second, toward the apartment, toward the life I was barely holding together. Then his gaze returned to mine. "Because by tomorrow morning," he said, calm as ever, "everything they took from you will start to change." I stared at him, not understanding, not believing, but unable to look away. "That is not possible," I whispered. His expression did not shift. Not even a little. "It already started," he said. And somehow, the way he said it made me realize, this was never about possibility. It was about decision. And he had already made his. I should have closed the door. That thought came a second too late, lingering somewhere between instinct and fear, but my hand never moved. He did not step inside. He did not need to. His presence filled the doorway like he already owned the space between us. "You cannot just show up here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He tilted his head slightly, studying me again, like I was a question he had already answered. "I can," he said simply. Not arrogant. Not loud. Just certain. That certainty unsettled me more than anything else. I crossed my arms without thinking, creating a barrier that felt smaller than it should have. "You said things would change by morning," I continued. "People say a lot of things." His gaze did not break. "I do not," he replied. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until I realized I was the only one trying to fill it. "Why me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was the one thing that did not make sense. Out of everyone in that building, out of all the lives that intersected with his, why was he standing at my door in a place like this? His eyes softened. "Not much. Just enough to notice. Because you did something rare," he said. "You chose truth when it cost you something." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "That is not rare," I said quietly. "That is just called doing the right thing." He almost smiled. "Almost." "No," he corrected. "Doing the right thing is common. Paying the price for it is not." I did not have an answer for that. The hallway light flickered again, casting shadows across his face, but his eyes stayed clear. Focused. Unwavering. "You should go," I said after a moment, my voice softer now. "My son is asleep." That was the first time something shifted in him. Not in expression. In attention. His gaze moved past me again, more deliberate this time, taking in the small apartment, the quiet, the life I had built piece by piece. When his eyes came back to mine, there was something new there. Not curiosity. Not calculation. Something closer to understanding. How old? He asked. The question caught me off guard. 5, I answered automatically. He nodded once, like that information mattered more than anything else we had said. Then I will not stay long, he said. I frowned slightly. You were not staying at all. That almost smile again, faint and gone in a second. Tomorrow morning, he continued, ignoring my comment like it was not relevant. You will receive a call. My chest tightened. About what? About what they tried to bury, he said. And what you refused to ignore. I shook my head, a small, disbelieving motion. You cannot just fix things like that. He held my gaze, unblinking. I am not fixing anything, he said. I am removing what should not have been there in the first place. The way he said it made something inside me go still. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. Like standing at the edge of something I did not fully understand yet. And what do you get out of this? I asked, because nothing in my life had ever come without a cost. His answer came without hesitation. Clarity. I blinked. That does not make sense. It will, he said quietly. The hallway fell silent again, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel louder. I realized then that I had not asked his name. Not once. Who are you? I finally said. He paused, just long enough to matter. Then he stepped back, creating space where there had been none. Someone. Who noticed, he answered. Not a name. Not an explanation. Just that. He turned to leave, his movements as controlled as everything else about him, but before he reached the end of the hallway, he stopped. Just for a second. Without looking back, he added, get some rest, Emily. Tomorrow will feel different. Then he was gone. And somehow, standing there in the quiet, I believed him. I did not sleep. Not really. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to every small sound in the apartment like it meant something more than it did. The refrigerator humming. The pipes shifting behind the walls. My son breathing softly from the next room. And beneath all of it, one thought that refused to settle. Tomorrow will feel different. I checked my phone 3 times before midnight. Then twice more after. Nothing. No missed calls. No emails. Just the same quiet screen reflecting back a version of me that looked more tired than hopeful. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I almost convinced myself I imagined him. That the entire conversation at my door was just stress catching up with me. That people like him did not step into lives like mine and change anything. By 6:30, my alarm went off anyway. Routine did not care about doubt. I got up, moved through the morning like I always did. Coffee first. Cheap, bitter, necessary. Then breakfast for my son. He sat at the table, still half asleep, rubbing his eyes while I poured cereal into a bowl that was slightly chipped at the edge. Normal. Everything felt painfully normal. Are you okay? He asked suddenly, his voice small but clear. I paused. Just for a second. Of course, I said, forcing a smile that felt practiced. Why would you ask that? He shrugged, spoon halfway to his mouth. You look different. I let out a quiet breath. Kids always noticed what adults tried to hide. Just tired, I said. It was not a lie. It just was not the whole truth. By 7:45, we were out the door. I walked him to daycare again, the same building that had called me yesterday, the same woman at the front desk who gave me a look that said she remembered everything. I nodded politely, signed him in, and kissed the top of his head before leaving. You will come back, right? He asked, his fingers tightening around mine for a second. That question hit harder than anything else. Always, I said softly. I waited until he let go first. The walk back to my car felt longer than it should have. The sky was clear. The air crisp. The kind of morning that made everything look like a fresh start. But I did not feel new. I felt like I was waiting for something I could not see yet. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, staring at my phone again. 8:02, nothing. I almost laughed at myself. Of course nothing had changed. Of course life did not work like that. People did not just appear at your door and rewrite your reality overnight. I started the engine. That was when my phone rang. Unknown number. My breath caught before I could stop it. For a second, I just stared at the screen, like answering it would make everything real in a way I could not take back. Then I pressed accept. Emily Carter. The voice on the other end was professional. Calm. Controlled. This is she. I sat up straighter without realizing it. We are calling regarding your employment termination yesterday, the voice continued. My grip tightened on the phone. There has been a development. I did not speak. I did not move. I just listened. We would like to request your presence this morning to discuss reinstatement and further action regarding the report you submitted. My heart stopped. Actually stopped. I do not understand, I managed. You will, the voice replied. And Miss Carter, we apologize for how this was handled. The line went quiet after that. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at nothing. My reflection in the windshield looked different now. Not stronger. Not safer. Just, aware. And in that moment, I realized something I could not ignore anymore. He had not made a promise. He had made a decision. And it was already happening. The drive back felt shorter than it should have. Not because the roads were clear, but because my mind would not slow down. Reinstatement. Apology. Development. Words that did not belong in my world suddenly felt real, heavy, impossible to ignore. I pulled into the same parking structure I had left yesterday, the one that still smelled faintly of polished concrete and expensive cologne, like nothing here had changed. But something had. I stepped out of my car and paused, just for a second, looking up at the glass building that had erased me less than 24 hours ago. My reflection stared back from the tinted windows. Same person. Same clothes. Same life. And yet, not the same position. Inside, everything moved like usual. People walking fast. Conversations blending together. Coffee cups in hand. But when I reached the front desk, something shifted. The receptionist looked up and froze for half a second before forcing a polite smile. Miss Carter, she said, standing straighter than she needed to. Yesterday, she barely looked at me. Today, she was waiting. They are expecting you. Of course they were. The elevator ride felt longer this time. Quieter. I watched the numbers climb, my pulse matching each floor like a countdown I did not understand. When the doors opened, the hallway was different. Not in structure. In atmosphere. Conversations stopped when I stepped out. Eyes followed me, not openly, but enough that I could feel it. Recognition. Uncertainty. Something closer to caution. I walked forward anyway. The same conference room door stood at the end, slightly open this time, like an invitation instead of a verdict. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. Everyone was already there. Same manager. Same HR, same people who had watched me leave yesterday without a word. But now, they stood when I entered. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough to notice. Emily, my manager said, his voice careful, controlled in a way it had never been before. Thank you for coming back. I did not respond right away. I took a seat instead, placing my bag on the table with steady hands that did not match the tension in the room. You said there was a development, I said finally. No hesitation. No apology in my tone. Just truth. That seemed to make him shift slightly, like he was adjusting to a version of me he had not expected. Yes, HR stepped in quickly. After reviewing the report you submitted, we found discrepancies in our internal processes. Discrepancies. That was one way to say it. I held her gaze. You mean the part where the numbers were falsified? Silence. Thick. Immediate. My manager cleared his throat. We are conducting a full investigation, he said. Effective immediately. I leaned back slightly, watching them instead of reacting. And my termination? I asked. That was the part that mattered. HR folded her hands, too carefully. It has been rescinded, she said. You are reinstated with full compensation for the time lost. The words landed, but they did not settle. Not yet. And the people responsible? I continued. My manager hesitated. Just for a second. They are no longer with the company. Of course they were not. I nodded slowly, absorbing everything without showing how much it shifted under the surface. So what happens now? I asked. He met my eyes, something like respect finally replacing dismissal. Now, he said, we correct what should have been addressed from the beginning. I studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the empty chair near the window. The same spot where he had stood yesterday. Watching. Silent. Certain. He was not there now. But somehow, I felt him anyway. Not in the room. In the outcome. In the way everything had changed without explanation. I stood up slowly, gathering my things, no longer unsure of where I belonged in this space. Good, I said quietly. Then let us start with the truth. And as I walked out of that room, I realized something that made my steps feel different than they had the day before. I had not been given my position back. I had taken it. And somewhere beyond those glass walls, someone had made sure I could. I expected to feel relief. Walking out of that building with my job back, my voice finally heard, everything technically restored, I thought something inside me would settle. It did not. If anything, it sharpened. The world looked the same, but it no longer felt neutral. It felt watched. Not in a way that made me afraid. In a way that made me aware. Like every step I took now mattered more than it did before. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already buzzing again. Messages. Emails. Notifications I had not seen in months. Some were apologies. Some were people suddenly remembering my name. Others were careful, distant, like they were not sure where I stood anymore. I did not respond to any of them. Not yet. I needed to understand what had just happened before I let anyone else define it for me. The drive to daycare was quieter than usual. I turned the radio off. Halfway through because the noise felt unnecessary. My mind kept replaying the same thing over and over. The way the room shifted when I walked in. The way they stood. The way they listened. Respect did not appear like that overnight. Not without a reason. Not without pressure. I parked and stepped out, the late afternoon sun softer now, stretching shadows across the pavement. Inside, my son was already waiting, his backpack too big for his shoulders, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw me. You came back early, he said, surprised. I smiled, crouching down to meet him at eye level. I told you I always would. That part was still true. Still mine. He grabbed my hand as we walked out, talking about his day, about something he built with blocks, about how his teacher said he did a good job. I listened, really listened this time, letting his voice pull me back into something steady. Something real. But even then, part of me stayed somewhere else. Back in that hallway. Back in that moment. When everything changed without explanation. When we reached the car, I opened the door for him, making sure he was buckled in before I closed it gently. Routine. Safe. Predictable. The things I could control. As I walked around to the driver's side, I saw it. A black envelope resting on my windshield. No stamp. No name on the outside. Just placed there, deliberate and impossible to ignore. My steps slowed. My heartbeat followed. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands like it might explain itself before I opened it. It did not. Of course it did not. I slid into the driver's seat, closing the door, the quiet inside the car suddenly heavier than before. My son was humming softly in the back, unaware of anything beyond his own small world. I kept the envelope in my hands for a second longer, then finally opened it. Inside was a single card. Thick. Expensive. Clean. No decoration. No logo. Just a name. Adrian Volkov. I stared at it longer than I meant to. So that was his name. It felt exactly like I expected it to. Controlled. Precise. The kind of name people did not question. I turned the card over. A number was written on the back. Nothing else. No message. No instructions. Just a quiet expectation. I let out a slow breath, leaning back against the seat, the weight of everything settling in a way it had not before. He had not asked for anything. Not once. He had not explained himself. Had not claimed credit. Had not even stayed to see the result. He had just decided. And now, for the first time since I met him, I understood something I could not ignore anymore. This was not a coincidence. This was not kindness. This was intention. I looked down at the card one more time, my fingers tracing the edge without thinking. Then I glanced at the rearview mirror, at my son, safe and smiling, completely untouched by everything that had almost gone wrong. My grip tightened slightly. "Mom," he said, noticing the silence. I forced a small smile, starting the engine. "Nothing," I said softly. But that was not true. Because as I pulled out of that parking lot, one thought stayed with me, steady and impossible to push away. If he could change my world this easily, then what exactly had I just stepped into? I did not call him that night. I told myself I would not. That whatever had happened, whatever he had done, did not give him a place in my life beyond that moment. I placed the card on the small kitchen counter beside my keys, like it was just another object, something ordinary, something I could ignore if I tried hard enough. But I did not stop looking at it. Not directly. Just in passing. Every time I moved through the apartment. Every time I reached for something else. It stayed there, quiet and patient, like it knew time was not a problem. My son fell asleep early, worn out from the day, his small hand still wrapped around the edge of his blanket the way he always did. I stood in the doorway longer than usual again, watching him breathe, grounding myself in something that made sense. Something that was mine. Because everything else was starting to feel like it belonged to someone else's decision. I turned off the light and stepped back into the living room, the apartment settling into that familiar nighttime silence. The kind that used to comfort me. Now it just felt incomplete. I moved to the kitchen without thinking, my fingers brushing the edge of the counter until they found the card again. Adrian Volkov. The name felt heavier now that I had said it in my head more than once. I picked it up, turning it over slowly, tracing the number written on the back like it might change if I looked at it long enough. "You are not calling him," I whispered to myself, the words quiet but firm. I meant it. I needed to mean it. Because calling him would make this real in a way I could not control. And control was the only thing I had left. I set the card back down and stepped away, forcing distance between me and the choice it represented. Minutes passed. Then more. I tried to distract myself. Dishes. Laundry. Small tasks that usually filled space without asking questions. But tonight, everything felt louder. Every movement. Every thought. Every second stretching longer than it should. By the time I sat down on the couch, the clock on the wall read 9:17. I stared at it for a while, watching the seconds tick forward, steady and unbothered by anything happening in my life. Then I looked back at the counter. The card had not moved. Of course it had not. But something about it made it feel like it had. Like it was closer. Like it was waiting. I stood up before I could think myself out of it, crossing the small space in a few steps that felt heavier than they should have. My fingers closed around the card again, this time without hesitation. I turned it over. The number stared back at me. No instructions. No pressure. Just a quiet certainty that if I reached out, he would answer. I exhaled slowly, my heart picking up in a way that had nothing to do with fear. It was not fear. That was the strange part. It was something else. Something sharper. Curiosity. Understanding. Maybe even a need to know what this really was. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen for a second longer than necessary. This was a line. I could feel it. The kind you cross once and never come back the same. I dialed the number before I could stop myself. It rang once. Then twice. And then, nothing. No voicemail. No delay. Just his voice, calm and immediate, like he had been expecting this moment all along. Emily. My breath caught. He said my name like it belonged to the conversation, like it had always been there. You took your time, he added, not impatient, not mocking. Just, aware. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. You left me a number, I said. It sounded weaker than I intended. He did not respond right away. I could hear the silence on his end, controlled and deliberate, like he was deciding how much to say. And you called, he replied finally. Simple. Direct. A statement more than a question. I tightened my grip on the phone. You changed things, I said. That was the only way to put it. No other explanation made sense. Another pause. Shorter this time. I removed obstacles, he corrected. I let that settle for a second, my mind trying to catch up with the reality of it. Why? I asked again, the same question that had followed me since yesterday. This time, he did not hesitate. Because you stood alone when you should not have had to, he said quietly. My chest tightened, something in his words landing deeper than I expected. That does not answer my question, I replied, softer now. His voice lowered slightly, not in volume, but in weight. It does, he said. You just have not accepted it yet. I closed my eyes for a brief second, steadying myself against something I could not fully define. When I opened them again, my reflection stared back at me from the dark window, different than it had been before. Not uncertain. Not broken. Just, standing at the edge of something new. What do you want from me? I asked finally. The silence that followed was not empty. It was intentional. Measured. And when he spoke again, his answer was the one thing I was not prepared for. Nothing, he said. Then, after a brief pause that changed everything, not yet. His words did not leave the room when the call ended. They stayed. Not loud. Not demanding. Just, present. Not yet. I stared at my phone long after the line went quiet, my reflection faint in the dark screen, like I was trying to recognize someone I had just become. I should have felt relieved. He wanted nothing. No conditions. No expectations. That should have been the end of it. But it was not. Because, not yet, was not an ending. It was a beginning I had not agreed to. I set the phone down slowly, the sound softer than it should have been in the stillness of the apartment. Everything around me looked the same. The couch. The dim light over the kitchen sink. The small details of a life built carefully, quietly, without anyone powerful enough to change it overnight. And yet, it had already changed. I moved to the window without thinking, pulling the curtain back just enough to look outside. The street was calm. A few cars passing. A couple walking their dog. Normal. Completely normal. But I knew better now. Normal was just what things looked like before someone decided to shift them. My hand rested against the cool glass, grounding me in something real, something I could still control. I repeated his words in my head again, slower this time. Because you stood alone when you should not have had to. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. No one had ever said that to me before. No one had ever noticed. Not really. I had always been the one who handled things. Who adjusted. Who made it work even when it should not have. That was how you survived. That was how you kept going. But he had seen it. And instead of admiring it, he had corrected it. The thought unsettled me more than anything else. I turned away from the window, walking back into the apartment, my steps quieter now, more deliberate. I checked on my son again, standing in the doorway just long enough to watch him sleep, steady and safe, completely untouched by the weight of decisions made outside his world. That was the only thing that mattered. That was the line I would not let anyone cross. Not even him. I closed the door gently and leaned against the wall for a second, letting the silence settle around me again. Tomorrow would come. Work. Routine. Life continuing like it always did. But I knew something now that I could not unknow. There were people who did not wait for things to happen. They decided them. And I had just stepped into the orbit of one of them. I walked back to the kitchen, my eyes landing on the empty space where the card had been earlier, now replaced by the quiet weight of a choice already made. I had called him. That could not be undone. I poured a glass of water, taking a slow sip, trying to steady the thoughts that kept circling back to the same place. He said he wanted nothing. Not yet. Which meant at some point, he would. The question was not if. It was when. And what that would look like. I set the glass down and turned off the light, the apartment falling into darkness except for the faint glow from the street outside. As I stood there, letting my eyes adjust, one realization settled deeper than the rest. This was never about what he took from others. It was about what he chose to give. And tonight, he had chosen me. Not as a favor. Not as an accident. As a decision. I closed my eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, staring into the quiet like I could see something beyond it. I did not know what came next. I did not know what "not yet" really meant. But I understood one thing with a clarity I could not ignore. When someone like him decides to step into your world, it does not end when they walk away. It begins.